Today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "Men are no longer burning women at the stake. They're now killing them by big government." There's a couple of important things that I learned when I was doing the research for this article yesterday that I want to share with you that I think are really worth knowing about. The article starts out with the story of a woman in Oklahoma who had a what's called a molar pregnancy. They are never successful, and they very often kill the woman carrying them. And this fetus was dying inside her, and she went to a Catholic hospital first because it was near her. But that is one in 6 hospital beds in America are run, as money-making operations for the Catholic Church. I realize they call it nonprofit, but you know where that money's going. And they refused to help her because they're Catholic. So then she went to the University of Oklahoma Medical Center, but that too was a dead end, no pun intended. They said, "We can't touch you because of Oklahoma law." To save her life, her husband drove her to Kansas, where there was an abortion clinic that was still open, and she had to walk through a jeering crowd carrying signs that said, "Stone all the whores." Seriously. These were the signs at the abortion clinic in Kansas. Now, if it seems to you like women in red states are the subjects of witch hunts, you are right. And when I did a deep dive yesterday afternoon into the history of witch hunts, I was just amazed by what I learned. First off, the Republican Party has turned this into a political thing. I mean, in 1980, prior to 1980, the Republicans and the Democrats were both just fine with Roe v. Wade. Pre-viability abortion is up to the woman, and post-viability abortion is, an issue that the state can intervene in, and appropriately so. I think there's a broad consensus across American society about that. Ronald Reagan had signed the nation's most permissive abortion regulations in 1967 when he was governor of California. And George Herbert Walker Bush, his running mate, was a big supporter of Planned Parenthood, as was his wife, all the way back into the 60s when he was a congressman from Texas. But leading up to that election, they cut a deal with Jerry Falwell and decided to go all anti-abortion, thinking that would help them out. So in doing so, they were really following a long tradition of men seizing political power on the backs, metaphorically, but sometimes literally, of women. The first witch hunts, there were not any consequential witch hunts before the 1500s, which in and of itself is fascinating. So what caused them to happen in the 1500s? What was it that caused the Catholic Church and then many Protestant churches to start going after and burning women at the stake, hanging them, drowning them, killing them, imprisoning them? Why? Well, a couple of researchers did a deep dive into this, Peter Leeson and Jacob Russ. It was published in the Journal of the Royal Economic Society about 10 years ago. And I'll just share 2 paragraphs of this study with you. Europe's witch hunt trials reflected non-price competition between the Catholic and Protestant churches for religious market share in confessionally contested parts of Christendom. By leveraging popular belief in witchcraft, witch prosecutors advertised their confessional brand's commitment and power to protect citizens from worldly manifestations of Satan's evil. Similar to how, these researchers wrote this, similar to how contemporary Republican and Democratic candidates focus campaign activity in political battlegrounds during elections to attract the loyalty of undecided voters, historical Catholic and Protestant officials focused witch trial activity in confessional battleground areas during the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation to attract the loyalty of undecided Christians. In other words, it was political. The witch hunts were designed to get people to sign up to be either Catholic or Protestant, whoever they thought would more accurately or more competently protect them from the evils of the witches. Also, the other thing that I noted, that I learned, was that throughout the late 1500s and into the 1600s, through the 17th century, in Europe and here in the United States, principally in New England, most of the victims of witch hunts were women who performed abortions or provided herbs for abortions, or in some cases were simply midwives. but they were, essentially, and why was this? Why did the witch hunters go after women who did abortions? Well, it turns out that in feudal England, in feudal Europe, actually, children were a cheap source of labor for the feudal lords. The feudal lords literally owned the serfs. They owned, if you were a serf family in Europe in the 1600s, you were the property of the local lord, as were your children. So anybody who was reducing the supply of child labor through abortion was to be, executed. And, there's also multiple studies from that era that show that whenever there was a time of economic insecurity in Europe, there was an explosion of witch hunts. Again, tying, producing children back to economic benefits to the family. So how does this apply to the United States? Well, in 1973, when abortion was legalized by the Supreme Court in the Roe v. Wade decision, the majority of workers in America were solidly middle class. Fully 65% of Americans were in the American middle class. 65% of Americans could buy a house, could buy a car, could take a vacation every year, could set aside money for retirement, and could do all this with the wages of one single breadwinner. That was the case in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was passed. And Roe v. Wade was not controversial. The whole backlash to Roe v. Wade really didn't start popping up until the late 70s, early 80s. Well, what happened in the early 80s? Ronald Reagan declared war on that middle class. He broke up unions. He criminalized unions. He froze the minimum wage. He raised taxes on working class people 18 times. He cut taxes on the morbidly rich 7 times. It was a complete reversal. And what we saw over the following years was a $50 trillion transfer of wealth out of the homes and checking accounts and savings accounts of working class people into the money bins of the top 1%, the morbidly rich. Now, what does that do? It produces economic insecurity. And once again, what we see when you look at the 1500s, the 1600s, the early 1700s in Europe in particular, but also in New England, during times of economic insecurity, witch hunts exploded. So here we are. And not only that, this is, this was all about economic competition. If white men who were fat and happy in 73, but no longer, now, if white men could knock out half of the population, the women, and another 15% of the population, African Americans, if they could knock them out of the workforce, by and large, effectively, or at least a large chunk of them, the green pie, as a consequence of Reaganomics, they would have a larger slice of that shrinking pie. How do we know this? Well, and that there were 5 states that had legalized abortion prior to Roe, prior to 1973. California, Alaska, Hawaii, New York, and Washington State. It was also legal in Washington, D.C. And so these researchers went back and they looked at the statistics of those 5 states versus all the rest of the United States before Roe v. Wade. And what they found was that abortion legalization, we're in the break, Sean, abortion legalization reduced the number of women who became teen mothers by 34%, and the number who became teen brides by 20%. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's a brand new day. Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us in just a moment for the entire hour, taking your calls, Middays with Mark, so you can queue up for that. The number is 202-808-9925. In the second hour of our program, why don't Americans know who's manipulating our political system and why? Also, the number one lesson to becoming a brilliant writer revealed. And a crazy alert, there's a new board game out just for fascists. It's called Storm the Capitol, Insurrection in a Box. In our third hour, now we're starting to go after other insurrectionists like I called for yesterday. Yep, they're looking to try to take down Scott Perry. This is getting interesting. Also, the Republican Party's nefarious plan to impeach Biden on Trump's behalf. This is just so damn cynical, and I have the details and the receipts. I'll share those with you in the third hour of our program. So a lot going on, a lot to talk about today. But to start out, Congressman Mark Pocan is on the line with us. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House. He's a current member and the chair emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's the co-founder and co-chair of the Labor Caucus, the chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus. His website is pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him or X him or whatever at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman, welcome back to the program. I noticed the news this morning, last night, the Fifth Circuit, the appeals court down south, 3 judges, 2 of them appointed by Trump and 1 appointed by George W. Bush, ruled that the federal law that says that, and this was a law that Reagan demanded because the argument was being made that there was no national health care system in America and people could die sitting out, standing outside or even in an emergency room. And so in, I think it was 83 or 86, they passed this law requiring emergency room physicians to provide emergency life-saving care. And the Fifth Circuit said, well, if it's a pregnant woman and she's dying because, something that has to do with her pregnancy, screw her, to hell with her. You can't save the life of the woman. What's going on with our country here, Congressman?
I mean, this is a continuation of the policies of Donald Trump moving forward. He controls, it seems like, the Republican Party as a cult, as we've talked about before. And when it comes to the issue of abortion, they can't have a position that's too extreme. And, I think what we're seeing is some of these Republican conservative-leaning judges helping solidify these really extreme positions that are completely out of the sync with where the American people are. So, 2024 is going to be a very consequential year, both now and in November. I think that's just one more reminder why we have to care about every single election in this country.
Yeah, especially the one coming up. So normally I ask you, when we start out the show here, when you're on, when we do this middays with Mark, what's on your mind? What's going on in Congress, or what's going on in Congressman Pocan's life that you wanted to share with listeners or talk about? What's up?
Sure. Well, I think one thing that I just saw this morning, and we had heard it was going to happen, but Bill Johnson, a Republican in Congress, just announced they were going to be leaving on January 21st for another job. You had Kevin McCarthy leave at the end of the year. George Santos was booted. That means the Republican majority is down to, I think, 219 seats, and 218 is the majority. If you thought governing with a 5-seat majority for them was difficult, where we had one of the least productive sessions in recent memory, I can only imagine 2-seat margin is going to mean to them moving forward, with a couple very consequential dates happening, with 2 possible government shutdowns coming up in just the next 2 to 4 weeks. So it's going to be a continued mess, even more so.
Are you guys preparing for a government shutdown? Are you fully expecting that?
I honestly don't know how to predict these folks anymore. I mean, any responsible Republicans, and I know there are responsible Republicans left, but they just don't speak out very much, know how dangerous that would be. And, we were fortunate enough when Mike Johnson just got to be Speaker that at least there was some logic, and we did a short CR for what they thought they needed to finish, a continuing resolution thought they needed to finish so they could actually have a budget done for the year. The problem is they can't even get the votes together with their 5-seat majority, much less a 2-seat majority, to pass appropriation bills so they can negotiate with the Senate. So I don't see what they can do other than have some sort of continuing resolution extension, understanding that they have a ungovernable majority, not so much by numbers, but by their own rules. And there's nothing else you can do. I mean, honestly, having a shutdown, what's going to be the resolution but a continuing resolution anyway, because they haven't passed their bills.
Right.
So, but who knows with, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz, and go down the list of characters, anything could happen.
Yeah, I totally get it. Wow. Okay, shall we pick up calls?
Absolutely.
Congressman Mark Pocan, ready for your calls. Judy in Bombay Beach, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, and happiest of the New Year's to you both. I appreciate you both so much.
Thank you.
And this is really a comment, not a question, and I have 2 of them. One of them is, Medicare Advantage. I've heard you both talk about this a lot, and I've never heard anybody explain. My friend, excuse me, who was on Medicare and had a supplemental, and by the time her supplemental kept going up, and so by 9 years in, her supplemental was $300 a month, and she couldn't get a cheaper one. So her only option was to sign up for Medicare Advantage. It's the only way she could afford it. So I just thought that was something I've never heard anybody say on the show before. Yeah, it's horrible. So, and I don't know what can be done about that other than just keep rooting for Medicare for all. And the other thing is that so I had health insurance under my husband's when he retired from the government. And then he decided to leave me after, we were on that for like 5 years, 6 years. So when I had to sign up for Medicare, I got penalized for the 6 years that I was not on Medicare, because they don't see divorce as a critical life change like they do death or something like that. So I think that needs to get in somewhere in the Medicare thing, because it's not, unbeknownst to me or anyway, you kind of suffer the consequences of someone deciding they wanted to walk away. So those are just the 2 things about Medicare I wanted to say this morning.
Well, thank you, Judy. You said them very well. Let's see what Congressman Pocan has to say about it all. Thank you.
Judy, I think you're going to hear a lot about Medicare Advantage this year, because now we have a group of members working actively on this, as well as a group of advocates on the outside working together actively on this. And the 2 issues you raise are excellent issues. One, part of the problem is that people have to do a Medigap supplemental policy on Medicare. And that's one of the things that often you'll be told you don't need to do on Medicare Advantage. The problem is there's all the other problems with Medicare Advantage, where you have to go in network. They can deny claims, and they deny millions a year, of which, when people wind up going through the appeal process, 81% get overturned. So clearly they're just kind of automatically rejecting things in order to try to save money, and that's costing people their lives. So, I mean, you can get cheaper care, but it's not going to be as comprehensive. There is one thing that if we got rid of the overpayments alone that happen in Medicare Advantage, which is $140 billion a year, you could pay for Medigap insurance for every single person in the country who's on Medicare. So that's one more reason why we have to talk about Medicare Advantage. And to your other point, I actually think you might have a bill idea out there. I was not aware. I know there's a penalty when you go back to Medicare. And again, the lobbyists did a good job when they got this bill passed to allow them to call themselves Medicare Advantage, period. But there should be, you're right, if someone has a divorce, that is enough of a life-changing thing. There shouldn't be a penalty then to be able to go on Medicare. And I'm going to take that back and see if there's something we might be able to do about that.
That's great. Congressman, do you think that if it was widely known in the United States that in 1966, when Robert Ball was writing the Medicare legislation, the original Medicare proposal was 100% coverage, for people over 65. And the Southern racist senators came to Lyndon Johnson and said, and Robert Ball, and said, we will oppose this unless you can put something in there that will present a significant barrier to poor black people showing up in our all-white hospitals and all-white doctors' offices. Because Medicare specifically forbids discrimination, racial discrimination. As did, the Civil Rights Act and before it, there was 2 years before that. So the only reason there's that 20% hole in Medicare is because that's what the Southern senators wanted, on the assumption that poor black people wouldn't be able to come up with the 20%, so they wouldn't bother to come into the doctor's office or the hospital. I mean, that's literally the only reason that that's in Medicare. Do you think that if people generally knew that there might be a movement to try to strip that out and just basically do away with Medigap?
In a normal Congress, yes. This isn't a normal, right? But, what you say makes perfect sense. And if we were able to express that and figure it out, we have another way we're working on. Our consortium is actually really trying to focus on this Medigap. I mean, as much as we also want to expand Medicare to dental, vision, and hearing, which should be covered as well because they're all medical conditions. This Medigap is the one I think that we've got a couple ideas that we're working on right now, and we are trying to address. But this Congress, I mean, with a 2-seat now majority instead of a 5-seat majority, not much is going to get done.
Yeah, I totally get it. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, the chair emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour in our Middays with Mark hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program Wednesday. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can find Congressman Pocan's website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan, and we'll be right back with your calls for him. And welcome back. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Happy Victory New Year, Congressman, and I hope we have good victories this year. I'm calling about your bill to remove Medicare, the word Advantage from Medicare Advantage, and I mentioned this idea also to Congressman Rocana, and I think you need to add on to it paying the Medicare premium for the people on Social Security. That's close to a $200 a month fee that we have to pay. And if the government actually paid that, it would not only save money, you would save billions of dollars, so it would pay for itself. So you could convince the Republicans with that it would actually pay for itself because it would keep people on Medicare instead of going to Medicare Advantage. And I'll give you one quick example. This open enrollment period, I had a friend. She decided to go on Medicare Advantage, and I tried to talk her out of it. And she says, I'm only getting about $1,000 on Social Security. I can't afford to pay the $200 to Medicare. I might as well go on Medicare Advantage. And yes, I do know all the disadvantages of doing it, but at least I'll have something because my only other choice is to drop all insurance coverage.
Yeah, no, Ziggy, it's exactly what we were just talking about. If you took all the overpayments where we actually get ripped off by either fake billing or faulty billing by the big insurance companies under Medicare Advantage, it's about $140 billion a year. That would cover Medigap for every single person on Medicare in the country. Just to give you an idea of the scope of how much we're getting ripped off, it costs more for Medicare Advantage. The whole idea, Tom, as you know, in addition to the industry trying to find a profit center, was could you find a way to be less expensive than Medicare? It turns out now Medicare Advantage is more expensive, and over half the people in the country are on it. but just the overbilling would cover that. So Ziggy, you're absolutely right. It's one of the main reasons people go to Medicare Advantage, and we have to address it. I think there's a bunch of bills out there that try to address different aspects of Medicare Advantage. We raised the one specifically on not allowing them to use the name Medicare in their name because it is such a smart lobbyist trick that they did in the bill. Like no other entity can I think of where you use a federal name, a branded name in your private product. Like you're not the U.S. Postal Service mail delivery and you have a private delivery service, right, for packages. You can't do that. Only is a Medicare official government product allowed to use that in the name of a private insurance when it becomes Medicare Advantage. You can be Blue Cross Blue Shield Advantage, you can be Humana Advantage, but you shouldn't be Medicare Advantage. And we use that as a tool to explain this issue to folks because it's not easy. That's why the lobbyists have made it that way. But we do need to get this information out, especially before next year's open enrollment period, so that more people can get the best possible care.
Yeah, you wouldn't see, Wells Fargo's Social Security program, that they're rolling out for people. You wouldn't see FedEx's new post offices around the United. I mean, you're so right about, the brand is owned by the federal government. It's just
and it's a way that people can understand the issue, and we can have the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we will be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here, Middays with Mark. George in Coarse Gold, California. George, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you, Tom, and good Representative Pocan. Recently, I renewed my rental of my U.S. Postal Service box at my local postal station, and it went up almost triple over last year. I was wondering if you've had any complaints at your office about this.
Yeah, George, I haven't heard it yet. Thanks for letting me know. I know that I think a lot of us are trying to figure out why DeJoy is still postmaster, bluntly. And, I think the seats are up to be appointed that could change that because the Postal Board of Governors are the only group that can get rid of him. But I wasn't aware of it, so thank you for letting me know. But I'll check with the office, but nothing has been. I get a weekly update usually of what issues come forward through the week. I haven't seen that one yet.
Richard in Palm Springs, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Ms. Pocan, Congressman Pocan. I'm calling. I need verification. I know this is a lie, but a friend of mine posted today that the reason the Democrats like the illegal immigration coming across the border under President Biden is because when they go to New York and Pennsylvania, they get the ability to get a driver's license. And those 2 states automatically register you to vote when you get a driver's license. And so therefore all of these illegal people coming into the country can vote and help the Democrats, which has to be bullcrap. Yes, they can get a license, but a state isn't going to illegally make them be able to vote if they don't belong here.
Right. It's a box you check, and you have to swear under oath and at risk of going to jail that you are a citizen. Congressman?
Yeah, Richard, first of all, you got to show them the remote control from a TV set and let them know that it does go on other channels than Newsmax and Fox, because this is where they're getting this bullshit, right? Sorry for my language there, Tom, but it's like so ridiculous. Right?
I mean, we beeped it, so we're good.
Okay, sorry about that. It's just so ridiculous that somehow that's why we're bringing people in and they can vote. You can't vote if you're not a citizen, period. So that's not true. But secondly, the very problem, right now a bunch of Republicans are going to go to the border to highlight the issue. Here's the problem. Congress, in its ineptitude, has not passed a law that fixes the broken immigration system we have. One of the few legal pathways you have is asylum right now. So everyone has to claim asylum because Congress hasn't done its job. When I first got to Congress 11 years ago, I think the bill passed 10 years ago, we had a bill that went through the Senate, 69 votes, bipartisan votes, added protections at the borders, pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans, fixed the immigration laws. And the House, John Boehner, never took it up.
Wow.
Since then, nothing has happened. So it is on Congress, nothing to do with President Biden. He doesn't have the power to change what needs to happen. It is up to Congress. So instead of passing a bill, this do nothing, know nothing Congress is going to do another vacation down to the border and huff and puff and get on TV, but not pass the legislation that's actually necessary. So just show your friends how to get to another network, maybe even, a comedy channel every now and then might lighten their spirits. But what they're listening to is completely false. You can't just vote unless you're a citizen. You're not a citizen simply by coming up here. And the problem is in Congress's hands.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour, Middays with Mark, and we will be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan on the other side of this break here at the bottom of the hour. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him or X him or whatever at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back with more of Middays with Mark after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right back on the other side of this break with your calls for Representative Mark Pocan. It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many, but they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists? Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. And Patrick in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I just want to know, since we're heading into an election year and the Democrats have lost 2 elections through the Electoral College, is there any discussion in Congress about talking to the Electoral College members to ensure that they do not put our democracy at risk by allowing a traitor to take control of the presidency and do what they're supposed to do, which is protect the nation? Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, Patrick, I mean, the Electoral College, I have to stand here. Sorry about this, Tom. In the office, our battery is low and the light keeps going off. If you see me moving, I'm sorry for anyone watching on TV. But the Electoral College, the people who are going to vote are selected after the presidential election. And, you know, the big scandal that we saw, we're in places like Wisconsin where people try to submit fake electors. Senator Ron Johnson, Wisconsin's embarrassment in the Senate, he himself almost gave fake electors to Vice President Pence in order to try to circumvent the results of the Wisconsin electorate. So, it's not like there's people right now to talk to per se. I think it's, we have to be very cognizant of the tricks that they will try to do to put Donald Trump back in power. And, fortunately, I think what the Department of Justice and some states are doing around this will be helpful towards the very concerns that you're raising.
Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom, thanks. Representative Pocan, I just want to say, and I know I speak for a lot of Tom's listeners, that you are a great public servant, and we do appreciate everything you do. My question is, you're welcome. My question is, how is the Save the Medicare Act going, and how you doing with signatures? And, this Medicare Advantage, like you said previously, is the epitome of lobbyists messing up the country. Thanks, Representative.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bob. And there is a coalition and of groups on the outside that are making this a priority issue. And I don't think we've ever had that. And, hats off to your listeners, Tom. This is where I think this conversation started, which is why Roe and I and Jan Schakowsky were leading with the bill to take away the use of Medicare and Medicare Advantage. But honestly, we're doing a whole lot more with this coalition now. We've done a bunch of letters to try to get more information to make the agencies that oversee this be more accountable in how they're looking at this. We've had multiple conversations with the Secretary of HHS, Javier Becerra, who I think agrees with much of what we're putting out there. We're trying to come up with solutions to address the Medigap insurance that exists, that people are paying on Medicare, plus trying to expand Medicare. So the good news, I guess, Bob, is there's more happening than ever on this front. And I think this is going to be probably the most active year you're going to see on this. So by the time we get to the enrollment period at the end of the year, hopefully many, many, many more people will be informed about this. And hopefully we can start some real movement to making it so that only Medicare is Medicare. And let's make sure that we protect and enhance Medicare.
Ann in Aroma Park, Illinois. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, thank you for having me on. Representative Khanna, I was going to ask you what you would be willing to do to prevent the biggest threat to Medicare that's also been flying under the radar for the last 2 or 3 years, and that's the ACO REACH program that under the Biden administration at this point, they are committed to privatizing the rest of Medicare by 2030 by putting anyone who's in traditional Medicare, by assigning them into private networks. And these networks are managed by different entities, including like the Carlyle Group. And under ACO REACH, these networks are allowed to keep, trying to catch my breath, are allowed to keep up to 40% of what Medicare pays them per person for profits and overhead. So what are you willing to do to stop that final threat to the rest of Medicare?
Yeah, so this is one that, just for full clarity, is better than it was under Donald Trump. There were, I think, 3 of these test programs out there, and the Biden administration got rid of 2 of them, and they kept 1, and they also revamped it very seriously. But we've been on the phone with them, people like Pramila Jayapal and Katie Porter and Jan Schakowsky, and around the phone dealing with this because we're still not happy with this one. But as long as we have test programs, we've got some other ways to test things as well. And I think this may turn out to work to our advantage in the end. It's not that the Biden administration is trying to do this. In fact, they've cut it by 2/3. they still are looking at what other alternatives could you do to save money. Look, the way I look at it, Medicare Advantage costs us more. That is the answer. Let's just kind of move on. But the one program that's left still is problematic, but they've done a lot of revisions to it. In fact, one time, Tom, you had a caller from Iowa who got put onto this. We had a conversation with her, not by her choice, and is having problems with it. So we're not stopping at it, but more importantly, it is significantly less than under the Trump administration, and I think we can use this to our advantage, those of us who want to reform Medicare Advantage.
Cool. Phil in Aurora, South Dakota, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Phil in Aurora, South Dakota, watching us on Free Speech TV? All right. Sorry, Phil. George in Cutler, Maine. George, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call, Tom, and good talking to you, Representative Pocan. I just want to support your effort to get Advantage, or Medicare rather, taken out of the rings, and I'd like to see the corporations become sharing their responsibility, because when you get this bill passed, they should share the cost of the PSAs, identifying the fact that they've been more or less lying about their programs right along. And secondly, they should contact all of their subscribers and let them know individually that they should change as best they can. And if I could, I'd like to make one more comment, and that is in support of our Secretary of State here in Maine, Shana Bellows, who has gone through the route of the 14th Amendment to get Donald Trump taken off of our election polls, and I hope that other states will join in that. Thank you very much.
Right, and she's now suffering from death threats, Congressman.
Yeah, George, I think, one other thing that's it's worth, and you brought it up really by talking about it, is the fact that Medicare Advantage advertises, right? But when we talk about open enrollment, it's because you are bombarded for 6 weeks on TV with an open enrollment period to get people to go to Medicare Advantage. But Medicare doesn't advertise because it can't. So, really think about how lopsided that is. You've got massive, amounts of former, popular actors, especially among an aging population, telling you this is, call this number and they'll give you advice when it's really an insurance agent you're talking to. I mean, there's so much scam in Medicare Advantage. I don't even know where to begin, George, but I hear you. And I think it's all part of the steps we're going to do to make sure that we protect Medicare so that it's around for a long time in the future.
Joe in the Poconos, Pennsylvania, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Okay. Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. I'm a 70-year-old retired individual. Now, I have a Medicare Advantage plan that I'm very, very happy with. But I do have some questions for you. First of all, it's with Geisinger Gold, and what they provide to me is amazing. I get a monthly OTC card that I can purchase 1,000 different items free of charge. I have a dental plan with them. They have a stipend of $1,000 a year that I have.
So, Joe, what's your question?
So, the question now is there's something happening. I just caught wind of this reading New York Times, reading Forbes magazine, that this might be the biggest merger in the healthcare industry, is this merger with Geisinger and KP, Kaiser Permanente. It's not been approved. I don't know how. What's the approval? Does it go through Congress? Can you tell me what has to be done for this to go through finally? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So, Joe, I don't normally deal with this, and Congress doesn't deal with this. There are federal agencies that if they think that they're too much consolidation can step in and stop a merger. And I don't know enough about this particular case to talk about it. But, let me just say, it's all right. If someone wants to have a private insurance alternative to Medicare, they have every right to. And it should just be on the up and up, right? Not that people think they're on Medicare because the program's called Medicare Advantage. The problem is if you're younger and healthier, it may work very well for you because that's how they get you. They give you some extra benefit, $1,000 dental. But I've also been told that some of these plans on that dental, you can only do one, I think it's eighth of your mouth or like a quarter or a third, maybe it's 1/6 of your mouth, a third of the upper and third of the lower like every year for things like root planing. Well, that's ridiculous. Like, who would actually do that, right? So you're getting a little extra benefit, maybe, but then you have to be a network, and they can turn down your medical care, which doesn't happen with Medicare, and a whole lot of other things that can make it a lot less advantageous. And I think what you might find, Joe, and I ask you really to do due diligence on this, is as you get older and, God forbid, less healthy, that's when it really gets you. I had a couple in their 80s who were on for almost 20 years at Medicare Advantage, wanted to switch to Medicare because now they were getting turned down for things they actually need in their older years. And the penalty was so much, like a woman earlier in this program brought up, that they can't do it. So now they can't get care, and they can't afford to get back to Medicare. Look, just be careful. You know, they're smart how they market, and if you're younger and healthier, they might have something good for you, but not for everyone.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, Middays with Mark, taking your calls. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And we will be back in just a moment with more of your calls for Representative Mark Pocan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's Middays with Mark. Your calls for the Chair Emeritus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus right after this. And welcome back. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Happy New Year, Congressman. And it's been 4 or 5 years since I've said so. So let me say a shout out to the wonderful state of Wisconsin. I think they're the friendliest people in the whole U.S. And I've been everywhere. Conomowoc, I love you. Kenosha, Stevens Point. Anyway, I'm just wondering if there's any conversation in Congress about foreign ownership of residential real estate in the United States.
Yeah. So thanks, Maverick. And I can tell you know Wisconsin because when you can pronounce Conomowoc, you're familiar with Wisconsin. So thank you for that. So there's a number of things around real estate we're looking at. Some of it has been foreign ownership. More of it, I think the single probably biggest issue that Congress needs to put more attention to around housing, because housing is so expensive right now, Tom, is around the issue of these hedge funds and firms like Trulia and Zillow buying up housing and then trying to rent it out in the market, because they're buying the housing has really driven prices up and made it much more expensive for people. And I think we need to get a good grip on that. There is some legislation in Congress. I doubt this Congress will do anything because this Congress is this Congress, but we have to start doing more to make people aware of what's going on and what some of the problems are, because much of inflation has been brought back down, but around housing, it's not inflation that's causing it. It's these bad practices by hedge funds and some of these firms buying up housing from under we haven't experienced before.
Nancy in Woodland, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, thank you. Another Medicare question. I have a friend who had original Medicare, and he moved to a neighboring state, a smaller town, about 30,000 people, and he wanted to maintain his original Medicare. But no doctors in town would accept original Medicare, and he either could drive to a large city about an hour away or go to the Advantage program. And so he opted to go ahead and do the Advantage program. Is there any way to get around that? I mean, can you require doctors to accept original Medicare? Thank you.
Yeah, I think most all doctors do accept Medicare. I mean, that's why. So I think it's a unique situation, or maybe they didn't call around it quite as much as they could have. In fact, this problem is much greater under Medicare Advantage because you get in a network and you have to go to doctors in network. And if you move, you might really be in trouble, because if that network doesn't exist, then you're going to run into the problem of, what you do next with your plan. And that's one of the biggest, concerns we hear from people on Medicare Advantage is, the doctors they want to see aren't in their network, where Medicare is much more open to where you go and you don't have to have your care approved. You just get your care. So, maybe have that person look a little more, or maybe if there's a way you can help them. But my guess is there may be a doctor much closer to them that does.
One of the things we're seeing, and I saw this with the medical practice that I was with and am no longer with, is that they got bought out by a hedge fund in New York that also owns a large insurance company, or a big piece of one. And they stopped taking Medicare and only take Medicare Advantage only from that insurance company. The entire medical practice. They got a half a dozen doctors there.
Their customer. Yeah, forcing you to be a customer.
Exactly. And it's growing. These hedge funds and venture capital firms or vulture capital firms or whatever the hell they're called are buying up medical practices left and right all across the country. So it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stay tuned. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls here. Abdi in Los Angeles, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. Congressman Pocan, thanks for your service. I have a question. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was listening to Amy Goodman's program, and she mentioned that a resolution for ceasefire in Gaza was circulated in the House. And only, I think she said 7 members signed it, and they were all, she said, among just the minorities. I'm wondering if you're aware of them. If you were, did you happen to sign it? If yes, thank you. Please elaborate on that. Why not other people signed it? And if you didn't, I would like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Abdi, thank you for that. So if you've heard me talk on this program, you've heard me talk about how inefficient this Congress is. We passed 27 bills last session, including post office renamings, one of the least productive Congresses on record. In fact, at some point in December, it was the least productive since the Depression. So this Congress, under Speaker Mike Johnson, with Marjorie Taylor Greene calling the shots, is never going to pass a resolution around ceasefire. So I think that as a tool has been looked at by most members as not effective. You have over 60 members who've called for a ceasefire, and that's what matters. The fact that now, finally, and this wasn't happening the first 4 or 6 weeks, collecting those statements and showing that there are a number of members of Congress, a very large number and growing, asking for a ceasefire. I think the resolution had maybe 20 people, give or take, on it. But again, that sort of resolution would be truly the least you could do because it's going nowhere. What you need to do is have people speaking out more, trying to get this administration to do more. And honestly, Joe Biden has been trying to get more of what we have been asking for, but far, far, far more needs to be done to protect the lives of now tens of thousands of people, literally, who've been killed in Gaza because of the Israel-Hamas war. So we need to keep pushing the White House. I think they still have some influence. We can't let the White House keep doing arms sales. That's up to Congress. And this is the second time the president's done this. Congress needs to have some sort of address on that. But a resolution that's going nowhere in Congress, I'm glad the groups have finally moved on to realizing that there's other ways to be effective, largely having members of Congress help pressure the administration to do the right thing.
Denise in Calumet, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Happy New Year, and thanks to all you do. My concern is every year we get a Medicare book in the mail, and there's 2 pages in the middle of the book talking about supplements, and the whole rest of the back of the book is selling Advantage programs. Why would Medicare itself be promoting the Advantage programs like this when they're not ideal for the people?
Yeah, Denise, so I haven't seen that, so I can't speak to it. What I can tell you is, Medicare is not allowed to advertise, right? And that's one of the problems. So during that open enrollment period, which I think starts roughly early November, maybe it's late October through like early December. You get bombarded by these commercials, and all the commercials really tell you is call this number, we can help you find the best plan for you. Well, they're giving you an insurance agent who's going to give you the best Medicare Advantage plan that's for you. And that's lopsided because it's competing directly with Medicare, which really I think still is the platinum standard. Yes, there's a Medigap insurance issue on costs, but you don't get turned down. You can go to most any doctor, not just within a network. There's so many reasons why Medicare is what we all have to protect. And but I can't speak to the booklet that goes out. I haven't seen it, but the problem really is on the advertising. That's, I think, what sucks in so many people to Medicare Advantage. And then they call that number thinking they're getting fair advice, and they've actually got an insurance agent.
You have got to get somebody on your staff to get a copy of that booklet for you. It goes to every American who's over 65 every year, and it's like 30 or 40 pages, and most all of it, like she said, only 2 pages of it is about Medigap. All the rest of it is pitches for Medicare Advantage plans. It's bizarre.
Yeah, no, I will look for that because
it's being paid for with our tax dollars, or paid for with our Medicare premiums.
And then you TV that happens later, and the only thing you see is Medicare Advantage.
Yeah. We only have about 40 seconds left. I'm sorry. Thoughts on the coming weeks, and what we should be looking for, and where we can focus our activism going forward.
Well, I know the House is back in session next week. I don't think the Senate's in this week. I could be wrong on that, but I think, you're going to start seeing activity again. The problem with the House is that activity will probably be around censure resolutions and non-binding resolutions and things that we can get done since we can't get real work done. But be active. This is an important year for people to be reaching out to their members of the House and the Senate, as well as state legislatures, and being heard, and make a commitment to 2024 being more active than you've ever been public policy-wise and politically, and I think that's a good New Year's resolution. Yeah, it's a great start. And what are the issues that, in your mind, are most important if we're calling our members of Congress on a regular basis to push for? It's going to be this issue of whether or not we have government shutdowns up front, because there's a mid-January date and an early February date, and we can't shut down. It's a lot of cost to the economy. It hurts government. Yeah, but it seems like they want to do that because it'll hurt Biden. Yeah, in an election year, exactly. There you go. Okay, Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today. Thank you, Tom, as always. Appreciate it. It's always great having you with us. Congressman Mark Pocan. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Why don't Americans know who's manipulating our political system? I'll tell you all about that right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. The feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. So why don't Americans know who's manipulating our political system and why? That's the headline over at HartmannReport.com today. I also posted it over on Daily Coats. Excuse me. And, you know, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've been wanting to put it down on paper, and so I finally did yesterday. Or put it down into a computer file, I guess you'd say these days. You know, for a long time, we've talked about where is the origin of this hyper-racist, nativist, fascist-loving MAGA faction that has largely taken over the Republican Party. Where did it start? Where did this come from? And on this program and in some of my writings, I have pointed to the Brown versus Board of Education ruling by the Supreme Court in 1954 that desegregated America's schools, or at least said we had to. It didn't, but you know, that was the effect. That was what it was trying to do. But that's really only half the story. The other half of the story, almost nobody knows, and that is that in the 1960s, America was suffering from a very real environmental crisis. And we were starting to wake up to it. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, which is a book about how DDT was destroying the ability of birds to have hatchable eggs. And thus, you know, one day we would have a spring where there were no birds chirping, you know, in the spring. And it shocked people. It created it was about DDT, it created the first nationwide environmental movement and led to legislation outlawing DDT, in fact. In the following year, 1963, smog killed 400 people in New York City. And in 1963, Lake Erie was declared dead. In 1969, a spark from a passing train lit the Cuyahoga River on fire. And that same year, a massive oil spill off the coast of California fouled 400 square miles of beach and coastline, killing thousands or millions of birds and other wildlife. Car exhaust, scientists reported in 1969, was so severe in America, it was causing birth defects and cancer. Major American cities like St. Louis smelled, like Time magazine reported at the time, like an old-fashioned drugstore on fire. I remember 1973, I think it was, I had gotten my pilot's license, and Louise and I rented a little, it was a Cherokee Arrow, was the airplane, Cherokee 4175 Tango. And we flew it from Lansing, Michigan out to Los Angeles. And I remember the approach into it wasn't LAX, it was one of the Hollywood airport or the Burbank or whatever it was. But I remember on approach coming into there, you could see this dome, this orange dome over Los Angeles. I mean, literally, it was like the city was covered by this orange cloud. That was in the 70s. And so Richard Nixon, came along and in response to public pressure. I mean, Richard Nixon was not a stupid guy. He was a very canny politician. He created in 1969 the Environmental Quality Council, and then in 1970 the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, what that did was produce an immediate backlash from the very, very wealthy oligarchs of American industry, particularly the fossil fuel and the chemical industry oligarchs, who hated the EPA right from the get-go. I mean, they felt persecuted because, after all, their fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, metaphorically speaking, their predecessors in these industries had been able to pour unlimited amounts of poison into our air and into our rivers and into our lakes and into our soils and things, with no consequence at all. Didn't have to pay a penny, weren't regulated, and that's what they wanted too. This was hurting them. It was hurting their profits. And they were seriously pissed off about it. So what they did was they decided to take Lewis Powell's advice. In 1971, Lewis Powell wrote this memo to Eugene Sindor, his neighbor and the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And in it, he said, rich people have been apolitical since World War II, and they need to get back into politics, like they were in the 1920s and 30s, producing the Republican Great Depression. They need to get back into politics, and they need to buy up the media. They need to use their endowments to install right-wing professors in colleges across the country. They need to create think tanks and influence public opinion. They need to have an army of writers and public influencers who can write op-eds and letters to the editor and all kinds of things. And so the billionaires took their advice. They created a network of think tanks. There's one in every state in the union, plus a whole bunch of national ones that were dedicated basically to trash-talking the EPA. And the other big thing that these billionaires at the time in the 1970s absolutely hated, which was the fact that after they took $3 million a year in income, they started paying 74% income tax on every penny after $3 million in today's money. And they were very upset about that. So they started this campaign, or they built this infrastructure. After Reagan in 1983 ordered the SEC, the DOJ, and the FTC to stop enforcing the antitrust laws, and then after Clinton in 1996, for radio, television, and newspapers, radio and TV stations, what we saw was, in very, very short order, certainly by the year 2000, 1,500 right-wing radio stations, Fox so-called news, all of these think tanks having their stuff regularly published in newspapers and magazines and things, the creation of brand new publications, all pushing this idea that the EPA was evil, that deregulation was a terrible thing, that we need deregulation, and that if you cut taxes on rich people, it will produce prosperity through this thing called supply side and trickle down. And they just pushed this, aggressively throughout the 70s. So when Reagan came into office in 1981, he was able to actually implement these policies. And, and Trump did too. In fact, Trump gutted over 100 major EPA rules and regulations. The New York Times kept a list of them. There's a hot link to it from my article. And this is what I think most Americans don't realize, is that these poor Republican voters who have been, all of this, literally billions of dollars, and the labor of tens of thousands of people over the last 40 years has been devoted to convincing Republican voters that cutting taxes on rich people and doing away with regulations that protect their children from poisons is a good thing. That we need to do away with these regulations because they're communism, don't you know, or socialism, and that we need to cut taxes on billionaires even more, even though the average billionaire in America right now is only paying 3% income taxes. We need to cut the taxes even more. And so what you ended up with by 2015, 2016, 40 years, 45 years into this process, was Republican voters who had been so thoroughly lied to, so thoroughly, essentially indoctrinated. They believed Rush Limbaugh when he pitched this stuff. They believe Sean Hannity when he makes these arguments that regulations are communism and taxes on rich people are a drag on the economy and all this kind of stuff. They believe that stuff, and the consequence of that, and the result of that, is that they've been made into marks. They've been made gullible. These poor Republican voters, they're just like suckers. And so along comes a professional con man, a guy who has literally spent his entire life being a hustler, a grifter, a salesman. Donald Trump comes in and says, I will save you from everything. And gives, wildly contradictory positions. He was going to give everybody in America health care that was better than Obamacare. He was going to raise taxes on rich people so much that his rich friends wouldn't talk to him anymore. He was going to bring back our jobs from overseas, and he was going to help revive the union movement. And in fact, he put an anti-union lawyer, Scalia's son, as the head of the Labor Department. He trashed the environmental regulations. He cut taxes on billionaires rather than raise them. He raised taxes on average working people. It was all lies. But, the people who voted for him, they're just so used to being lied to by right-wing billionaires. And make no mistake about it, Donald Trump is a right-wing billionaire too. They're just so used to being lied to by these very, very wealthy people that they just kind of take it. They just absorb the lies and go, oh, yeah, okay. So, I guess, what do you have to say? Well done, right-wing billionaires. Thanks for nothing. But I think that this story, this 50-year-long plot, essentially, executed by some of America's richest men, really needs to be told. And so I told it today at Hartmann Report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What's the number one lesson to become a brilliant writer? I'll tell you about that right after the break. And welcome back. James in Hollywood. Hey, James, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Thomas, and everyone listening. What's on my mind is what is just overwhelming. Today, you and me are dropping bombs on innocent Palestinian people. And I have a simple solution, and so I wanted to talk to Mark about. But some of your listeners out there, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to computers, but I want to do a letter for Biden to read, have millions of American people sign it, that if for Biden to say to Netanyahu, if he does not allow a 10-day ceasefire and let in all the trucks, then he never gets another rocket, bomb, or bullet from us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree.
Right.
And I think Congressman Pocan would too. I mean, he's a strong supporter of basically pressuring, at the very least, pressuring Israel to stop this. And I don't want to speak for him, and I realize this situation has a lot of nuance to it. So, but I think he would have gotten a good reception from him.
Netanyahu was a madman.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Netanyahu's a grifter and a criminal who knows that his political future now is
a madman. He's earned his toothbrush mustache. Jeez.
There you go. James, thanks for the call. Chris said, I'm not sure I would compare him to Hitler, but Chris in San Diego, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I was hoping to speak to the congressman, but I just want to, why can't the liberals, figure out what the Republicans have? We keep complaining that the media isn't putting our message out there. We're not getting the coverage. We're not getting the coverage because that's not the media's business model anymore. It's sensationalism. The Republicans today are down at the border, and they are sensationalizing that when they're not doing anything. Now, the Biden administration released a statement countering it. That's not – we've got to get coverage. The way you get coverage, send Kamala Harris down there and literally have her banging on a podium saying, we are trying to fix this, but the Republicans won't come to the table. Call them out on it.
I agree.
Absolutely. Why can't we learn to do that? The Republicans learned from Kennedy and Nixon. Oh, my God, we have to get a celebrity. And they went out and got Reagan. They learned. Why isn't Biden out there yelling about legislatures and robes? Remember when the Democrats had the power? The Republicans were always up there. We don't want legislatures and robes. That's exactly what we have. How do we get this through to the guys in power? It's about coverage. And we're not going to get coverage setting back. We've got to have a Jim Jordan on our side, a frothing at the mouth liberal, who's going to.
Yeah, we used to have that with Teddy Kennedy, Yes. I agree. I completely agree. And I call it political theater or guerrilla theater. And the Democrats are just not good at this, and they need to get good at it.
We have to.
Yeah.
That's why I was hoping to talk to the congressman. Maybe I'll call back next week.
Yeah. Well, maybe the squad or something. I don't know. It's we're everybody wants to be respectable right now, I think. Chris, I got to run, but thanks for the call. But I completely agree with your sentiments. Great calls today. 21 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more. I got a crazy alert for you, too, and the number one lesson to become a brilliant writer right after this. Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. One of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. 1/4 of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. So over at we've got this new website where I can talk about things that go beyond just the political, shall we say. Hartmann Report is all about politics. HunterandAFarmersWorld.com is all about ADHD. These are topics that I write on and have written on for years and years. And then I've got this third one. It's called Wisdom School. What it means to be human is the name of the site. Wisdomschool.com is the website. And, I've written about interpersonal relationships and spirituality. And now I'm starting a new course on how to become a brilliant writer. And we just dropped the first in the series. It's titled The Number One Lesson to Becoming a Brilliant Writer Revealed. And I just wanted to share this with you. Back in the early 1970s, a friend of mine owned an ad agency, and he and I started a small business together, an herbal tea company. And he took me under his wing in his ad agency. I was about 6 or 8 years younger than Terry O'Connor, maybe 5 years younger. I'm not sure how much older than me he was, but he'd been in the business for a while. And he had some pretty good clients. We did work for Kellogg's. We did their shelf talkers. We did the cover. The box, the outside of the box for Corny Snaps. I don't even know if they still sell them, but it was a sugar-laced cereal. And we had the Michigan National Bank and whatnot. So anyhow, I wanted to learn how to write advertising copy because I was working with Terry. And so this guy, Joe Sugarman, was running a course in New York City, and he was one of the most famous copywriters in the country. And so I saved for months and months and months and flew out to New York and attended his class. And he said, here's the number one mistake writers make. They think they're writing to an audience. And by the way, I would add, it's the number one mistake that people on radio and television make too. Because there is no audience. I mean, there may be 6 million people listening to me right now. There may be, you know, I mean, my HartmannReport.com gets about 2 million page views a month. But a million people are not reading it, you know, all together. Every single piece that you write, and you know, if you're on radio or television, every person who's listening to you is hearing it as a singular experience. They're sounding out those words in their own head. They're hearing what you say as if you're talking to one person. So when you write, you need to trick your brain into writing in a conversational style. And what Joe said is the way you do that is you think of somebody you know, somebody you like and care about, and somebody who would have an interest in the topic you're writing about. And then you write the article to them, or you write the ad copy to them. And what that does, in fact, you start out, you put a piece of paper in the typewriter or bring up a document and say, Dear Margaret, Dear Aunt Marge, here's, that, and you just start out that way. In fact, the piece that I published yesterday, and I talk about this in the article at wisdomschool.com, I wrote to Ron Kenyatta, who's, started a new Substack newsletter, and, we've talked about the art of writing, he and I, many times, not on the air, but kind of in back channel. And so, you just write it to somebody. And what happens is your brain just kind of drops into a conversational mode. And now your stuff isn't dry and boring because you're not writing to an audience, you're writing to a person. So that's the number one lesson to becoming a brilliant writer. And I would add, if you want to do a podcast or if you want to do a radio show or a TV show or anything else, podcasts are the most common. Again, just always think that there's just one person on the other end who's listening. You're talking to one person. I'm talking to one person. A, it's a lot less intimidating. And B, it causes you to personalize, basically, humanize everything you're saying. Because we talk to individuals differently than we talk to crowds, right? So you can find it over at wisdomschool.com. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Crazy alert, new board game out for fascists. I'll tell you about that after the break. And pick up your calls. Stay with us. Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading them and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, Hitler called to president. That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. 34 minutes past the hour, a crazy alert, a new game called Storm the Capitol. Yes, wouldn't it be fun to storm the Capitol? It's only $64.99, 65 bucks, and you can relive one of the funniest days in American history. What do they call the two teams, as it were, in this game? One are called the Capitol Police, as you might expect. The other are called insurrectionists? No. Seditionists? No. Criminals? No. They're called patriots. So, do you want to be a patriot, or do you want to be a Capitol policeman? Very strange. Storm the Capitol is the world's first board game based around the events of January 6th, says the game's website. Take control of one of 6 patriots as you battle through the Capitol, collecting ballots, taking hostages, and fighting the police. It's absolutely weird. I also wanted to highlight one more time, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here, what I mentioned at the very beginning of the program to Congressman Mark Pocan, and that is that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a court that is consistently opposed to abortion in any form, the most conservative court, appeals court anyway, in America, the Fifth Circuit, a 3-judge panel, the Judge Leslie Southwick, who was a George W. Bush appointee, Judge Kurt Engelhardt and Corey Wilson, who are Trump appointees. These 3 judges just ruled that the federal law that was passed at the request of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, so that Reagan could say, we don't need a national health care system because everybody in America, if they're in an emergency, has to be cared for. Right? I mean, this was his way of ending any kind of debate around a national health care system. In fact, I should write about this. I should make this my op-ed for tomorrow. It all started with Reagan, right? He wanted this law passed that if you show up in an emergency room and you're having an emergency, they have to treat you whether you have money or not. Prior to 1980, whatever the year was, 3 or 6, 83 or 86, prior to that, you could show up at an emergency room and they would say, okay, give me your credit card. And you say, I don't have a credit card. Well, give us some money. No, I don't have any money. Then they could kick you out. And they did. Especially if you were a person of color. So Reagan got this law on the books that said that if you show up in an emergency room with an emergency, particularly a life-threatening emergency, they must treat you. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just ruled last night, or yesterday afternoon, that does not apply to women who are pregnant. It applies to everybody else. You know, if you show up and you're having a heart attack, you got no money, they got to treat you. If you show up and you're having, an attack of pancreatitis, they got to take care of you. If you show up and you got broken bones or you're bleeding, they have to take you in. But if you show up pregnant and dying from the pregnancy, they don't have to treat you officially now. Now the Constitution is pretty explicit about this. It says the federal law is the supreme law. The Constitution is the supreme law of the nation, and federal law trumps state law. It's right there in the Constitution. Not exactly in those words, but it's there. But the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals says, the way that law was written back in the Reagan times, it doesn't mention abortion, so we'll just slice that out with a little scalpel here. This is today's Republican Party. I'm telling you, it's crazy. All right, let's pick up your calls. What's on your mind today? Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Yes, hello. You have to have a strong stomach to stick with a lot of this and listen to it. It really can make you feel kind of sick of things.
On the one hand. On the other hand, I think that if we are successful in fighting this good fight, that the potential for America and the potential for our children's future is actually pretty good. I mean, we've got some really serious challenges, obviously. But I don't do this with a grimace. I do it with a smile. I'm convinced that right is on our side. Back to you, Diane.
Well, I'll pick up on your optimism, and I'm glad you encourage people to do that, to take action and write to their politicians. Could I make a suggestion of a book? And it's called The Midnight Kingdom. Have you read that?
I haven't read it. I've heard the title. I don't recall why. It was some years ago, wasn't it?
Sexton. I'm not sure when it was published, but it gives such insight into the mind of the Trump Trumpers. Why they think, why they buy conspiracy theories, and what their attitude is toward women, and why they are so enamored with Trump's meanness, because he's going to be their friend that's going to be mean to the people that they don't like, and how he's given them permission to be aggressive and cruel. It's a very interesting book, and it's an easy read. And if you subscribe to Audible, it's free.
Interesting.
Yeah, he is really, really good and easy to understand.
Yeah, Jared Sexton's a good writer. He's a very good writer. I haven't read that book. And you know what it reminds me of in some ways is that I remember when I was like in third or fourth grade, this kid moved in down the street, Dennis, who was just a bully. And he just, he beat up everybody. And I tried to become his friend so that he wouldn't bully me. And that lasted about 2 weeks. And then he turned on me, and that's the lesson that the Trump lovers have not figured out, is that he's going to turn on you.
Bullies don't want friends.
Exactly. They want people terrified of them. Period. Full stop.
And getting back to yesterday about you talking about psychopaths, I think Bibi is a psychopath.
Yeah, I agree.
But what I'm calling about is the Electoral College. And in Michigan, we had voters not politicians, where we had a, what do you call where you get signatures, to change the way the borders are drawn up for different politicians and voting. Gerrymandering, that's the word. And we did that through a group, and I got signatures in my area. Everybody took on their area and got signatures and pushed this through on the ballot in Michigan, and it was a referendum, and it passed.
Yeah, it's one of the things that it's one of the reasons why Michigan is now a Democratic trifecta. It's because you have basically honest redistricting. You've got honest districts that actually reflect, the will of the people as opposed to the will of the politicians.
Want.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is some optimism there that you can do things in group. But the Electoral College bothers me. I attended a caucus one time. It was for Hillary. And we had to make the delegate we were sending, vow that they would vote for the person that we sent them to vote for.
Right.
Now, what's honest about that? I think that's a flaw in the electoral system. And also, we had the problem with the fake votes. And the one caller talked about the ballots, and I think the congressman misunderstood. I took it to mean we're going to be watching the votes like hawks this time around.
Right.
But and also on C-SPAN, I'm quoting where I heard it, 5 times the president that didn't win the most votes, in other words, the loser, became the winner through the Electoral College, and Trump is the most recent one. 5 times the vote of the people was ignored.
Yep.
And I think, how do you get rid of the Electoral College?
And if it had been Democrats who were elected rather than Republicans, I guarantee you 1,500 right-wing radio stations, 3 right-wing television networks, hundreds of right-wing publications, and thousands of right-wing trolls, probably millions of right-wing trolls across the internet, would be yelling and screaming to end the Electoral College. I'm with you. The reason why... Go ahead.
Oh, and what did the Democrats do? They respected it.
Yeah, I know, because it's the law.
They didn't like it, but they respected
it. I don't get me started on Democrats not speaking out, because that, but the reason why electors can choose anybody they want, they don't have to go with the person that the state elected, is that the reason for the Electoral College in the first place was because in 1787, when they're meeting in Philadelphia and writing the Constitution, it could take a week for news to travel from Washington, D.C. to Savannah, Georgia. So people really didn't know, people who were far away from New York and D.C., which were the respective seats of government in the early republic. In fact, it was New York right up until the John Adams administration. People at that time couldn't get to know individual candidates for office. There were no national newspapers. People in the outlying states were largely uninformed. And so the theory was that, you know, if you were a Georgia voter or a Florida voter, what you'd do is you'd elect a couple of people to represent you. These would be the electors, who would travel to Washington, D.C. on December 14th, who would meet with all the candidates, who would conclude, if they concluded the candidate that they had been pledged to was actually a drunkard or a man of low moral character. I'm using the phrases that Alexander Hamilton used in Federalist, I think 54, in which he was describing the Electoral College. Then they could vote against that person. In other words, they could protect their state from, you know, from electing somebody that really shouldn't be president. And so the whole idea of the Electoral College was to prevent somebody like Donald Trump from ever becoming president. Obviously, it has failed, Diane.
That's dating back to when there weren't newspapers, national
That's exactly
newspapers.
right. That's exactly right. It's a complete
Let's get up to
anachronism.
date.
It's a complete anachronism. Diane, thank you for the call. But you're absolutely right. It's time to get rid of the Electoral College, and the only way that, you know, reasonably that we can do it right now is through this interstate compact. And, you know, we need to be pushing for that. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls after this. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Dan in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you so much for your program. I used to listen to you when you were on NPR.
You mean Air America?
Well,
you know, maybe I was on an NPR station. The network never carried me, but some of the affiliates do. So thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
So what's up?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your show. Can we donate directly to you, or do we have to donate through Free Speech TV?
I don't take donations. You know, our program is largely supported by advertising on the commercial side. So, you know, if you want to support us, support the platform, Free Speech TV, that's carrying the program. Absolutely.
Great, I will do that.
And they appreciate it.
What I had in mind was the fact that you need to push for the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act.
Yeah.
The reason for that is when it passed in the 50s by the Republicans after the election of Eisenhower, they wanted to find a way to basically reduce the membership in the unions.
That's
I'm
right.
a union member myself, and that law allows non-members to get the same benefits as members get. So in other words, we're paying the membership fees to get those benefits so that our leaders can fight for our contract.
Yep.
But yet people that don't belong to the union get the same benefits exactly, and that's because of the Taft-Hartley Act.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan. There was a 2-year period between 1932 and 1996, I think it was, when Newt Gingrich swept the House of Representatives. There was a 2-year period when Republicans controlled both the House and Senate during that entire stretch, because Americans remembered the Republican Great Depression. And that was the election of 1946. The Republicans took both the House and Senate, and in 47 and 48, you had what Harry Truman referred to as the do-nothing Congress. It was very much like right now. They just did nothing. Except in 1947, they passed Taft-Hartley. And Truman vetoed it, and they had a large enough majority that they were able to override his veto. And so, and what it does, as you said, is it allows states to opt out of the provisions of the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act that was passed in 1935, that say that you have a right to unionize. Unions have you know, the right to represent you. And if you join a union, you have to go along with the rules of the union, essentially. And what they said was, you know, you can work in a workplace. An individual state can mandate that you can't have what are called closed shops. And now every red state in the union is a right to work for less state. They called it, you know, right to work legislation. I call it right to work for less. Every single red state is now a right to work state. And there's a few blue states that are right to work states because they were controlled by Republicans at one point, and the Republicans passed right to work legislation. And, you know, again, based on Taft-Hartley. And Harry Truman referred to it as that vicious Taft-Hartley Act. I think he was absolutely right, Dan. And I would love to see a movement to repeal Taft-Hartley. It's going to take, it's going to take a really substantial Democratic majority in both the House and Senate to do it. But it would rebuild the American middle class really rapidly. Dan, thank you. That was excellent.
Should have done it when Obama was president.
I agree. Obama, he had promised that he was going to do something like that. He was going to do card check. It's one of the things that, just one of the failures, one of the things that just didn't get done, sadly. But, what can you say? Dan, thanks for the call. I mean, an awful lot of Obama's presidency didn't have a Democratic Congress. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. 10 minutes before the hour, welcome back. Kelly in San Jose. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love you. We all love you here in San Jose.
Thank you.
Anyway, I always call, and there's so many topics in my head of city. Anyway, I wrote a couple things down. I've called before. Full disclosure, I am a licensed insurance broker, Santa Clara County, but I was calling to talk to Rep. Pocan about veterans. Veterans, even if they've served in the military and gone to war, when they hit 65, if they don't enroll in Part B right away, they get that late penalty. And sometimes they don't know. So 5-10 years later, they need, and the PPO
because they're using their veterans benefits. They just assume that that's going to be enough for their retirement.
There's no ambulance. There's not a lot of services. So there are some PPO plans that are Advantage plans, but they work well with veterans because they keep all their VA, doesn't interfere, not HMOs. Those don't work with veterans bills. But anyway, so they need to remove the late enrollment penalty for veterans. It's stupid. I've gone to talk with Medicare, and it's a rule. The other thing is you had a gentleman call in and said a lady he knows or someone, they only make $1,000 a month and they're paying their Part B. Under Medicaid, if that state expanded, especially in California and Oregon, if you make under, I think it's $1,600, you can actually get Medicaid or Medi-Cal, and they will waive your Part B or portion of it. Also, for people listening, if you're having trouble paying your prescription drugs and you don't qualify for Medicaid, go to socialsecurity.gov, apply for LIS, Low Income Subsidy for Extra Help. You may be able to get some help, at least paying for your drugs. And if you are going to enroll in an Advantage plan, I have clients who've had hips, knees, heart. They go to the doctors. Get a local broker in your county or the next county over that knows the plans, knows the doctors.
Get an advocate.
If you need to go that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so
I
those
totally
are my
get
2
it.
cents.
Okay,
Thank
Kelly.
you for everything. We love you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Great stuff.
Bye.
Good talking to you. George in Crystal Lake, and Kelly makes some great points. George in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, hesitate to say this out loud. Hate to give anybody an idea, but I have absolutely zero confidence in this Supreme Court. And what do you think the chances are that this Supreme Court could rule that Trump could run for president but not be seated, and if he were to win, just leave us in November with nothing but chaos?
Wow. I don't know, George. I mean, I wouldn't put anything past these guys. They are, Clarence Thomas is nakedly corrupt on the take, along with his wife. Sam Alito on the take. Neil Gorsuch, had a wealthy benefactor buy his home. I mean, it's like, these guys are just...
Oh, yeah.
It's just, so I just don't know. It's an interesting question, it's really hard to say. George, thanks for the call. Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Before the holidays, I spoke with Representative Pocan about messaging, and he said there was no one person or organization that existed, and the best way to talk about messaging was to call your representatives. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask him this, but I'll just pick your brain. And then my question, why the hell is there not a central point or a central person in the Democratic Party for messaging? And what brought this up is during the holidays, I think it was a repeat, where Representative Ro Khanna was not aware of the two Santa Claus theory, which just astounded me because he's brilliant.
I know.
And to back this up, before I talked to you, I called my Senator Durbin's office and I spoke to the rep, and I asked him if the representative, the guy answering the phone, if he was aware of the two Santa Claus theory. This has been going on since Reagan. This should be a meme in the American psyche.
Yeah, it's been going on since it was 76, actually, when Jude Wininsky wrote that piece for the Wall Street Journal laying out the two Santa Claus theory and saying Republicans need to adopt this, and they've done it ever since. When you got a Republican in the White House, spend like a drunken sailor, and when the Democrat comes into the White House, scream about the debt.
Is that so hard if you're on Meet the Press or PBS to explain how you just explained it? And yet the Democratic Party, I have yet to talk to a single Democratic aide who was aware of the two Santa Claus theory. And when you ask them, you get that, you can almost hear the, oh no, I've got a live one on the end of the line.
And I can tell you why arguably the job of messaging should be, is Jamie Harrison the head of the DNC right now? Sean? I think so. I'm pretty sure he still is. He's been on our program a couple of times. But, it should be his job. The problem is that he has to represent all of the Democrats. And you've got Democrats on one side who are saying, we have to have Medicare for all and let's, lots of good progressive things. And then you got Democrats on the other side, like Josh Gottheimer or Jared Golden, who are basically sellouts. I mean, they call themselves problem solvers and, they got fancy titles, New Democrats and stuff like that. But really, they're just people who are on the take from big corporations. And so, if you're representing the entire party, you've got to take this kind of milquetoast position because you can't be trash talking your own people. And
I can accept that to a certain point, but come on, the two Santa Claus theory, I'm serious.
I agree.
For my God, that not again. This should be a meme in the American psyche, not just in with the Democratic
I completely agree.
And yet
we only have 15 seconds here. Let me just quickly summarize this. Jude Wininsky said that Americans always thought of Democrats as Santa Claus because they gave us Medicare, Social Security, unemployment benefits, minimum wage, all this kind of stuff. And Republicans needed to become Santa Claus too, and they needed to force Democrats to shoot their Santa. So Republicans should become tax cut Santa Claus. They should, whenever there's a Republican in the White House, they should cut taxes and increase spending and drive up a debt. And then when a Democrat comes into office, they should force the Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus of Social Security and other benefits by demanding that they cut benefits for average working people. And they've been running this con since 1981. Ed, thank you for the call. Spot on. Alrighty, on the other side of this break, the GOP's nefarious plan to impeach Biden.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at Thom Hartmann. Check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. Celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933. Just Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was but the bourgeois parties of the right who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. His only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even within, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is. when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian region. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. Call yesterday, somebody called in and went off on a rant about, why is Trump the only insurrectionist official? Not the average dweebs who showed up at the Capitol building to poop on the carpets and pee on the walls and deface the 300-year-old paintings. But why are members of Congress not being held accountable the way that Trump is being held accountable? And for that matter, I would add to that, why isn't Trump himself being charged with sedition? Bill Barr came out yesterday afternoon and said, the Supreme Court should keep Trump on the ballot because the Department of Justice never charged him with sedition. How can you keep him off the ballot if he's never, for sedition, if he's never been charged with a crime? And Bill Barr actually has a point, and I wish that Jack Smith would take that very seriously. But, setting that aside, beyond Trump, there's this 147 Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate who voted to make Donald Trump president in 2020 after he lost by 7 million votes. And a number of these people were clearly in on, or apparently clearly in on, the planning of what became an attempt to overthrow our government that led directly to the death of 5 people that day and the death of 4 police officers over the following days. So now Congressman Scott Perry, the Republican from Pennsylvania, who apparently is the guy who was pushing John Eastman, he's the guy who was, calling on Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, apparently. We don't know the whole story because the FBI just finally got permission from a federal judge to examine the contents of Scott Perry's phone. And even at that, they're very narrowly circumscribed in, whatever the proper word is, in what they can look at. They can only look at some of the stuff, right? Because there's this thing in the Constitution that says that you cannot hold a member of Congress to legal account for anything they say or do in their job as a legislator. It's called the Speech and Debate Clause. So if somebody gets up in Congress and says, I want everybody to rise up and, murder the governor of XYZ, and somebody rose up and murdered that governor, that person giving the speech in Congress could not be held to account for it, for inciting violence. You're immune from prosecution if you're a member of Congress, if you can assert that what you were doing had something to do with your function as a member of Congress. And these seditionists, these traitors, who supported Trump's effort to overthrow our government and keep himself and turn himself into, emperor for life, these traitors like Scott Perry are relying to a large extent on the Speech and Debate Clause. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, all these wackadoodles, or worse. So now there's a lawsuit This has been filed by a fellow by the name of Gene Stilp, excuse me, S-T-I-L-P. He's a former congressional candidate. He's a political activist in Pennsylvania. And he has filed a lawsuit against Al Schmidt, who is the Secretary of State for Pennsylvania, demanding that Schmidt remove Scott Perry from the ballot because he is a seditionist. Now, this is going to get real interesting. George Stockberger reports, the lawsuit alleges Perry helped push conspiracy theories that the 2020 election was stolen and advanced efforts to replace the Attorney General with a Trump loyalist. That would be John Eastman. Scott Perry was or maybe it was Chesborough. I think it was Eastman. Scott Perry was a leading proponent of using the January 6th congressional presidential election certification process to disrupt the transfer of presidential administration from Trump to Biden, says the lawsuit. He's also trying to get any information on possible criminal activity, quote, from the lawsuit, quote, by Scott Perry or any other party discovered in this case, end quote, to the Pennsylvania Attorney General for potential prosecution. Now, this is where it's going to get real interesting, because you've got this question of what is sedition, which would disqualify you from being on the ballot? Who decides what is sedition? And who decides who has committed sedition? Because we are, at the moment, with these politicians anyway, with Donald Trump and these 147 Republicans in the House and Senate, I think it's now like 120 some odd of them who are still in office. I mean, some of them have left, right? Kevin McCarthy left, et cetera. But George Santos left. I don't know that he was part of this plot, but you get the point. So, there has been no actual court proceeding. There's been no adjudication. There's been no legal process that has legally determined that these people committed sedition. Now, there was one guy in New Mexico who showed up on January 6th. He was one of the people on the ground in the Capitol who was running for county commissioner, and the New Mexico Supreme Court, worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they said, yeah, that guy committed sedition. But he was, I don't know that he was charged with sedition itself, but he was charged with the crime of being on the premises of the Capitol. So, you can build a little stronger case. But I think that we really need to start going after these other insurrections. And again, the timidity of Merrick Garland and this Department of Justice is just astonishing, just breathtaking. It took him 2 years, and he had to be shamed by the January 6th committee, by the Republicans on the January 6th committee, to appointing Jack Smith. And Jack Smith hasn't charged Donald Trump with sedition, which, still has me scratching my head. I mean, it's not too late. Hey, Jack, if you're listening, consider this. You can drop another charge against Donald Trump. Charge him with sedition. Let's get this thing before a court. So that's my number one story. My number two story to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here, is could the House Republicans be laying a trap on their Biden impeachment inquiry, as it were? Now, what we know so far is two things. Number one, that our esteemed Speaker of the House, Mr. Mark Johnson, has empowered, he got passed a resolution that would empower Jim Jordan and James Comer, the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee, to begin looking into whether there is evidence that would justify impeaching Joe Biden. So far, they got nothing. They have nothing to impeach him on. Every single trial balloon, we finally found the evidence that Comer and Jordan have come up with has been found to be BS. Just, nothing. Joe Biden is an honorable, decent human being who, as far as anybody can tell, has not committed any crimes. It's just pretty straightforward. Now, you can't say the same for his son. His son was a real screw-up. He appears to be trying to get his act together, but his son is not Joe Biden. His son is not president. So what's their strategy? Well, it appears that, and this is becoming clearer by the day, and so we can kind of put this in the category of a political prediction, that what Republicans are going to impeach Joe Biden for is contempt of Congress. And the way that they're going to get there is they're going to harass him with subpoenas to the point that he throws his hands up and says, I can't do this anymore. In other words, you know, they send a subpoena to Joe Biden saying, we want all your correspondence with your son. And so he sends them a bunch of correspondence. And they say, no, we want even more. We want the stuff that, you know, we want the private correspondence. And he sends them some more of that. And then they say, no, we want to know what you said over the Christmas table in 1993. You know, they just start asking for just wild, obscure stuff that they really have no right to, but they can ask for. And at that point, Joe Biden says, you know, I'm not going to send, that's a stupid request. I'm not going to respond to it. Now, there's a precedent for this, by the way. The Republicans have done this before. They did this before with Eric Holder, the Attorney General. Remember Fast and Furious? Fast and Furious was a program that was put into place during the George W. Bush administration. And it was where they had gun stores down in the Southwest that were collaborating with ATF, that were working with ATF, who were illegally selling weapons to people who were then smuggling them into Mexico. Knowingly selling them these weapons that got smuggled into Mexico. And some of those weapons ended up being used to kill an ATF or a Border Patrol officer, which is how this all burst into the public consciousness. And it happened during the Obama administration. I mean, Obama didn't even know about Operation Fast and Furious until this happened. And when it happened, he put a stop to it. So again, the George Bush program. But the Republicans thought, we can use this to get rid of Eric Holder. You know, oh my God, we've got, you know, the chief law enforcement officer in America is a black guy. We can't have that, said the Republicans. So they started subpoenaing Eric Holder, demanding information about Fast and Furious, and eventually the demands became so weird, so far out, so bizarre, that the Department of Justice simply stopped responding to them. And when that happened, the Republicans in Congress tried to tried to hold Eric Holder in contempt of Congress. They actually held a vote on it. They didn't win, but they almost succeeded in holding him in contempt of Congress, which would have, you know, has fines and jail times associated with it. So it looks to me, and to a lot of other people over a Raw Story, Matthew Chapman writing about it, it looks like this is going to be their strategy. Let's do to Biden what we did to Eric Holder back during the Obama administration, and use that refusal, that ultimate refusal that we see coming down the road to send any more data, to send any more information, to respond to any more subpoenas. Use that refusal to establish contempt of Congress as a crime, a high crime and misdemeanor, and then impeach Biden for the high crime and misdemeanor of contempt of Congress. Now, this is not an impeachable offense, but what they're trying to do is water down impeachment so that nobody takes seriously that Trump was impeached twice.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They're also looking to impeach Mayorkas, the head of HUD, or HEW, HHS, whatever it is. They're just trying to dilute impeachment. That's all that they're all about. Okay, and welcome back. Rich in Indianapolis. Hey, Rich, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, dude, you are so welcome. Happy New Year. Do you hear me well?
Yeah, you're fine, good. Rich. And Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. I wanted to offer an awareness around what we're calling modern monetary theory, which kind of throws people because it is a strange title about something that's really fundamental, because the United States has the world currency, the reserve currency. Everyone buys dollars and everyone buys treasury bonds. And because of these facts of economic architecture, we have something that nobody else does in a way that we have to be really respectful of, really, how would you say, shepherding and real husbandry of, using other terms that sadly are sexist. But we have to take care of something that is so delicately mass appeal held by everybody of consequence on the planet who has money and will invest in us. What this means is that as the Republicans are throwing out, it's a $32 trillion deficit.
I think it's 34
never been
now.
so big.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, the point
and every
being
penny of it,
is
by the
that-
way, you can track back to 3 major tax cuts and 2 wars, all brought to you by Republican presidents.
Bump.
Yep.
And so what we're dealing here with is Republicans with that that mentality of the bait and switch of the two Santas thing.
Mm-hmm.
We are dealing with a situation where we're getting punched in the kidneys by the Republicans. Be afraid. And it's all hogwash.
Yeah.
And the reason it's all hogwash is because we have a world reserve currency that is backed by the full faith and force of the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, and really the only downside to having a large national debt, and I think Japan has established this by having a national debt that is over 200% of GDP for more than 30 years, and ours is right now at 130, 125% of GDP, more or less. The only downside, or the major downside, is that you have to pay interest on that debt, and that becomes a line item in your budget. If you can afford to do that, then the other thing that MMT points out is that it's mostly debt to ourselves, which means that basically what has happened is that the United States government has become the best, it's become like a bank that everybody can trust. It's the best place to put your money if you want to invest your money for the long term. And there's no shortage of people around the world who are looking for safe, low interest, but safe and predictable returns. And that's what treasuries provide.
Exactly. There's a wonderful word from Japanese, kaizen. It means forever improving. And it's nice to have that in your pocket, kaizen.
Okay, I got it. Rich, thank you for that. We'll work on our kaizen here. Appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good talking to you. And Happy New Year. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. So what's on your mind today? Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today? What's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had thought about tracking some of the issues brought up by your callers who are talking to Representative Pocan, because they're kitchen table issues. And what I'm hearing mostly is, about Medicare and the do-nothing Congress. So when it comes time, getting past the nominations, and the Republicans are going to say kitchen table issues are important, and you could have a database of what people are asking your guest, what's concerning them. For Republicans, it's the border crisis, but I don't hear anybody calling you and saying the border crisis is the major issue.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good idea?
It's not a bad idea, Alan. I mean, there's a certain amount of selection bias. Everybody's audience, the audience for each different radio or television program is slightly different. It has to do with the age of the host. It has to do with the political perspective. So it would give them a good understanding of my audience, but not necessarily a good understanding of the overall American electorate or even the Democratic electorate. I think, probably many of my listeners and viewers may be more progressive than mainstream Democrats, for example. But it's not a bad idea, and I think one of the reasons why I go out of my way to try to have these guys on, and we've got two of them who are regulars, and we've made this invitation to every Democrat in Congress. If you want to come on this program for an hour and take calls, you're welcome to. And every now and then, Sean will reach out to another, member of the Progressive Caucus and invite them on. I'd love to get Jan Schakowsky on, for example, to do the same thing. Jamie Raskin would be a great one to come on and take questions. Love to do that. And part of the reason why is not just to inform us about what they're thinking, but to inform them about what we're thinking.
Exactly. I loved it when you had Bernie on, week after week.
Yeah, 11 years. 11 years, every single Friday. In fact, we even did the Friday after Thanksgiving 2 years in a row. I mean, it was just crazy. Bernie's the Energizer Bunny. He's just the Energizer Bunny of politics. He's such a good guy. Alan, I got to run. I think I'm hitting a break here. Yeah, I'm 15 seconds into it. Thanks a lot, Alan. Good talking to you. We'll be right back on the other side of this break with your calls. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Zuzana in Rapid City, South Dakota. Hey, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Happy New Year. Love you.
Thank you.
I have an observation. I am from former Czechoslovakia, and I have lived through 1968 invasion by the Russian army.
Whoa.
And we all believed that it was an invasion. However, we were, through the media, told that it was a liberation. And so lots of people's minds have been bent to believe things that normally could not be believed because we were seeing it. And that's what I am seeing here now. So I am a little bit of a poet. So here I would like to share with you my observation. May I?
Yeah, if it's brief, if you're going to read something, please make it very brief.
Very brief. Those who dare lie to you will bring you a world where the highest lawman and the lowest outlaw are one and the same.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Focused on their promises, you don't see their games, since the greatest darkness is just beneath the flames.
Huh. I like that, Susanna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a great day. It's great to hear from you, and I wish you a happy New Year. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yesterday, I take umbrage with something you said. I've called you many times. I agree with you 90% of the time.
What?
But I put 80%. Okay. Anyway, so you were putting TM together with the Hare Krishnas and the Manson family and people like that as a cult. And I disagree with you vehemently. I've meditated for 49 years. I've been on different courses and things. I've never met anybody who slightly resembles a cultist of any sort. Cultists are like Trumpers. They are like Moonies. They're like evangelicals. They do extreme damage to the world. An example of meditators is people like David Lynch, who spends a great deal of money on teaching meditation to people with PTSD or victims of sexual assault. Oprah Winfrey, Jerry Seinfeld. The list goes on and on. And I say in my own life, the huge differences I've seen in my own life are an example. I was talking with my best friend the other day, and he said, you know something, John? You were the most hyper guy when I met you back in college when I was in my 20s. He said, now you're the calmest guy I know. And he said, that's probably because you meditate. I'm a lot less likely to anger over little things. I see the good in people. I think that's one really great benefit. It's easy for me to see the good in people, even if I disagree with them on something. So anyway, have at me if you disagree with anything I've said.
No, I think you're absolutely right, John. I took Transcendental Meditation initiation when I was 16 years old, TM. From one of Maharishi's people. That was in the early days when they were, this was like if I was 16, it would be 1967. When they were sending out authorized trainers, and they sent somebody to MSU, and they had this 2-week-long thing, and you had to go through this whole course, and you got your mantra, and you had to keep it super secret, and I did the whole thing, and I meditate every day. I meditated this morning. I get up in the morning, I go downstairs, I make the coffee for Louise, and I sit and I meditate, while the coffee is percolating, and it's 5-10 minutes of meditation every morning, pretty religiously. And, I've been doing that for, 50 years now? So I agree with you. Where we disagree is the definition of a cult. And, because there are bad cults, and certainly Charlie Manson was one. And then there are positive cults, people who love Bernie. I think, arguably we qualify as a cult. But my point was that when you have a charismatic leader of a movement, let's use the word movement instead of the word cult. When you have a charismatic leader of a movement, typically, with very few exceptions, when that leader dies, the movement, it doesn't necessarily die, but staggers. TM is nowhere close to what it was in the 60s. or even the 70s, for that matter. I think Maharishi died in the late 70s. And it's just a ghost of itself. I was also a member of Self-Realization Fellowship for years and years, and I took Kriya Yoga initiation from Yogacharya Oliver Black, who was, Yogananda's right-hand guy for years and years, and ran the Detroit Center for years. He was an old man when I took initiation in the early 70s. And again, when they passed away, when Yogananda passed away, SRF, which I'm still a member of, SRF, kind of faded away, and now it's just this little organization that does kind of cool stuff every now and then, but it doesn't have the juice that it had with a charismatic leader, and that was my point, and I stand by that.
Well,
and the extension of that is that when Trump is no longer able to become president, he no longer has any political power, his movement is going to fade too. That was the point, the larger point that I was trying to make.
Let's hope on that. But may I correct you on something? Maharishi didn't die in the 70s. He died, I can't remember exactly, in 2009, 2010, something around there.
Really?
And he appointed a leader named Tony Nader, who is a medical doctor, a Lebanese medical doctor.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and so they're still doing what they've always been doing. I don't think, as for how many people they have doing initiations and things like that these days, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But an awful lot of people, meditate in silence. I mean, they go and they do their meditation every day, and so maybe they're not getting headlines, and it could have something to do with how much media coverage there is. Again, I have no idea how many people are initiating, but believe me, I have gone on many weekend courses and things like that, and I find it to
I'm glad to hear that the organization is still together and still doing good work, because I'm a big fan of TM. It's been a very positive force in my life. And so anyhow, John, I need to move along. It's not fair to people who are sitting on hold want to jump in here. But thank you for the call and good conversation, and keep meditating. It's good stuff. Don in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted I'm also from Michigan, and I've talked to you about the Great Lakes before. Mm-hmm. The Corps of Engineers okayed the permit for Enbridge to use a tunnel underneath the Straits of Mackinac to then route their 70-year-old, which was designed with a 50-year lifespan, their 70-year-old pipeline that crosses under the Straits of Mackinac.
Right, this is between the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan, for people who don't know what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yes. And, even the Republicans are opposed to this thing in Michigan, because a lot of them make their livings up there in beautiful, relatively pristine
it's a disaster waiting to happen. And the Great Lakes don't flush the way the oceans do.
No, and the Great Lakes, the U.S. Great Lakes, the U.S. Canadian Great Lakes represent 20% of the world's surface fresh water, 90% of North America's surface fresh water. And this is it's not a resource that you should take lightly. And, it's stupidly running. That was okayed in 1952. The pipeline as it stands, in a lot of places, it wasn't properly supported. It's been hit by bankers and damaged, and the waterproofing that around it is leaking. And so, it's just a total disaster. Anybody who wants, this doesn't mean that they absolutely get to do it, but the Corps of Engineers okayed the permit. If anybody you just go to the Corps of Engineers and look for the Straits of Mackinac, Enbridge. You can comment again coming up. I don't think the comments are open yet, but they're going to issue a draft environmental impact statement, and then you can comment on that. I commented earlier.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know this was an open issue right now. Thank you for that.
Oh, well, it's coming up. I will contact you later and let you know the exact details. I found out this thing got passed this morning.
Right.
But, when they first applied for the permit, they had comments. And I made comments at that point, and some other friends of mine, biologist friends of mine, made some comments. The comments were like 99 to 1 against it. The only people who comment for it are different interests, commercial interests in pipelines and oil. But, this is a serious issue. And, of course, it also crosses the Great Lakes again over at Sarnia, at the southern end of Lake Huron. And that takes, the Line 5 no longer carries dilbit, the tar sands oil.
Right.
But that passes through southern Michigan, where they had the second largest oil spill internal oil spill in North America in history.
The one in, was it Kalamazoo or
Marshall,
Coldwater?
Near Marshall.
Yeah,
near Marshall.
Exactly.
The plume didn't quite make it to Kalamazoo, but it really did about 50 miles of that river in. I mean, it'll never be the same. And some people got very sick, too. That line goes up to Sarnia and Port Huron and crosses there. That would be a disaster if that thing split. I've never read about them renewing that. That's not quite as old, but that's 50 years old.
Yeah.
And, that's about how long the service life is on these things.
And these, by the way, are not just unique to Michigan. We've got this problem all over the United States with these aging oil pipelines and gas pipelines that are leaking methane into the atmosphere. Don, I got to run, but when you call back, when you get all your details, bring a URL, a simple URL that people can use to get the information, okay?
I will.
Okay, good talking to you, Don. Thank you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Oh, this is interesting. They just announced that Joe Biden is going to speak on January 6th, this Saturday, at Valley Forge. This is going to be interesting. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Brian, in Tacoma. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Just the other caller about 45 minutes ago who was frustrated with the Democrats' lack of messaging, and specifically Ro Khanna, and specifically the two Santa Claus theory. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes. I like screamed at, I mean, I love Ro Khanna. I don't want to pick on him specifically, but I screamed at him specifically. I have screamed at him in the past when he's on your program. He's like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. And I just.
Well, not everybody knows everything. Come on.
I get that. But I'm calling more about, like, I think Democrats in general think that the term talking points is like a dirty word or a dirty set of words. It's bad. We're used to it. We allowed it to be used for decades by Republicans as like manipulation, as propaganda, as Sean Hannity lies, as whatever, but they can be true as well. Yeah. Talking points can be true. And, Democrats just need to get so much better at that, like so much better. I know you scream that all the time, but I
agree.
Like the border crisis. That's a Republican-created border crisis because of what you said many times. Republicans are screaming the border's open. We're never going after employers here who are hiring them illegally. Republicans aren't doing that. This is a Democrats need talking points. Talking points can be true. True.
I absolutely agree. I would love to see a bunch of Democratic congressmen hop on a plane and fly down to Texas and raise some hell. We want Mike Johnson, I called him Mark earlier. We want Congressman Speaker Johnson to bring up legislation, for comprehensive immigration reform and for funding, border activities. Yeah, I'm with you. Brian, excellent. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Ed in Tillamook, Oregon. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Question. Mm-hmm. How do you tell when you've been taken by the world's greatest con man?
You vote Republican.
That's the answer. I mean, the answer is totally open. It'll cover your cult question as well.
Yeah.
Have a Happy New Year.
Okay, that's it, Ed?
That's it.
Okay.
How do you know when you've been taken by the world's greatest con man?
Okay,
Think about
got it. Thank you. Clay in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Hey, Clay, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. The deal with the 20% not paid by Medicare, and you say that you were saying that it was demanded that be put in to keep poor blacks
Strom
out of the
Thurmond, as I recall.
Okay, Strom Thurmond was one. Okay, because I've been looking for that and haven't been able to find it.
It's in my book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare.
Uh-huh.
All the information is in there. Race was a huge issue in the 60s.
Sure, yeah.
And the Southern politicians were just totally freaked out about the possibility. And these were Democrats, by the way, and Lyndon Johnson was a Democrat. They all became Republicans after the Civil Rights Act, but in 67, most of them were still Democrats.
I've been wanting to point it out to a couple of, right-wingers, and I haven't been able to find the source to point them to. So.
Yeah, I don't have the book right here in front of me, so I can't, just do a quick look in the index. And I'm not sure it would be in the index, but it's in my book, because I learned it when I wrote the book. It's in the book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare. Clay,
right, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for the call. And thanks for watching us down there in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Happy New Year. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 49 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Rick in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I remember the irreparable damage back in Bush beats Gore. Well, the Supreme Court now, wouldn't it be irreparable damage if they didn't take him off the roll, or at least leave it to the states because of the it is in the Constitution about doing sedation. I mean, they can't very well do what the Republicans say and leave it up to the people, because from what I understand, the people, it ain't in the Constitution. You have a constitutional right to vote. And as we know, we didn't leave it up to the people, Bush versus Gore either.
Yeah, Rick, excellent point. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, in 2000, when first Florida was called for Al Gore, and then they did the whole Stop the Steal thing down there, and Roger Stone was down there, and with a whole bunch of people from Tom DeLay's office banging on the windows and saying stop the count and whatnot. And this went before the Supreme Court, and the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court, in the decision that Rehnquist wrote, in the decision he said that it would cause irreparable harm to complainant George W. Bush to allow the recount in Florida to continue, because if they continued the recount in Florida, they would demonstrate that Al Gore actually won the presidency in 2000. And I'm with you. I think irreparable harm is a mild description of the consequence of a Donald Trump presidency, of putting a seditionist into the White House. And but see that what this demonstrates, Rick, is that the Supreme Court is a political body, just like the executive and legislative branches. That they dance to the tune of politics as much as anything else. And certainly, I would argue historically, the Supreme Court, at least when it's being run by conservatives, has been much more interested in advancing political agendas than doing what's the best thing for the nation, or doing, for that matter, anything that comports with the original vision of the founders, or at least the more egalitarian among the founders. So,
but this is a constitutional matter as far as sedition.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And they should be standing up for the Constitution.
Yeah, I get it.
Some of the states are doing, and that's why it went to the Supreme Court, because they were standing up for the Constitution, and no man that was involved in sedition should run. And that's what they should be, the irreparable harm to our Constitution if they don't stand up for these states that are saying that they don't think this man is eligible.
I agree. I completely agree, Rick. And what we're just going to have to wait and see. It's not, the Supreme Court is not It's the one agency that you can't lobby. So, you know, we've got some serious work ahead of us. Rick, thanks for the call. Excellent points all. Tim in Mattawan, Michigan. Excuse me, Tim. What's up?
Yeah, well, you were talking about the Great Lakes, and I asked my Republican representative once, so what's your plan? Let Line 5 leak and that'll kill all the Chinese carp in Lake Michigan?
And your representative said?
Nothing.
Nothing, yeah. It doesn't seem like a particularly good plan, frankly. You know, although the invasive carp apparently has become a real problem. These were fish that started out as goldfish, right?
A leak in Marshall was on sheet metal Local 7 Zone 1 property.
I don't know what that means.
Well, I'm a member of Sheet Metal Local 7.
Oh, I see.
And it was on our property.
Oh my, wow. So what caused that leak?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember either. My recollection is that it was somebody doing some construction, that it was somebody digging up some earth, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. They didn't fix our parking.
They didn't fix your parking lot? Yeah. Tim,
right.
Thanks a lot for the call. We have a lot of environmental problems in the United States right now that are the result of, this fossil fuel legacy. And sometimes I think back on, in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, we had electric cars. I mean, one of the first cars that Henry Ford made was an electric car. There were a lot of electric cars. And then in the 60s, you got General Motors and, I believe it was the 60s, might have been the 50s, General Motors and Firestone conspiring to kill the electric car. They made a movie out of it, Who Killed the Electric Car? And can you imagine if that had not been destroyed, if the fossil fuel industry had not succeeded in that? By now, we would have an electrical infrastructure all across the country. We'd all be driving electric cars and we wouldn't have global warming. I mean, all over the world, people would be driving electric cars because the whole world has followed us. It's crazy. Anyhow, thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag You're It, and I'll catch up with you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.